Okay, so let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining Ten2Two for our webinar on how to create a winning CV. I describe us as the grandparents of flexible working, having supported candidates like yourselves for, I think, over 18 years now, Jo, would you say?
Yep,
Where
indeed.
does time go? As experts in flexible and part-time recruitment and consulting, we do have a wealth of experience in this area. So we'd like to share some of this with you now. It's great to have so many of you with us for this important session. And we do hope that you can take away some useful tips to help you with your career search. I'm Jane O'Gorman, Director of Ten2Two and your co-host for this session. And joining me, as you will see, is my lovely co-director, Jo, who will be leading the presentation. Now, we have around 30 minutes for the presentation, here or there, and hopefully 10 minutes at the end to cover questions. I will be keeping an eye on those questions, so if you have any over the course of the session, do pop them in the Q&A below. And there is a lot to cover, so we will try and cover as many as possible, but if not, don't worry. We will follow up with the Q&As after the webinar. Now, there's no need to write too much down, as we will follow up with some useful information for you too, including a CV template, a link to the webinar, and the Q&As that I've just mentioned, so that's quite a lot of information to gather. But without further ado, what I would like to do is to hand you over to our lovely Jo to kickstart the presentation. Jo, over to you.
Thank you, Jane. So as Jane kindly introduced, my name's Jo. I am one of the directors here with Ten2Two. I've been with the company for nearly 10 years. Cannot believe that.
Happy anniversary.
And prior to that, I was in-house recruitment. So I've looked at a lot of CVs, so hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your questions as we go through, and hopefully you'll find today's webinar really useful. As Jane said, there's a Q&A box, so please feel free to type your questions in there. If for any reason we don't get round to answering your questions, we will try and follow up with as detailed a Q&A as possible tomorrow, and you can always contact us directly. So at the end of the presentation, mine and Jane's email addresses will be on the screen, and obviously through the correspondence you've had from us, you've got our contact details. Please do reach out if you've got any questions, and we will do what we can to help. So I have a tendency to waffle a little bit, so this agenda will hopefully keep me on track. So tonight we're going to power through quite a lot of information. It is quite top level, but as I said, hopefully it'll be really useful, and the documents that we send out as a follow-up are incredibly useful. We've had some really good feedback from candidates who have found that they're very valuable. So first of all, why a CV? Then where to start? I know if you're anything like me, writing a CV is just the scariest thing in the world. It's horrible, but we will hopefully make it a little bit easier with this guide. Some basics that you need to be aware of, the main components of your CV, and as you'll see, that's broken out for you there so you can see the kind of main components, but we will go through each of those in detail, what to avoid, and then a summary. So why a CV? CVs have been around forever, and everything else around them in the process has changed. So why do we still have a CV? CVs are useful, firstly, to shortlist candidates for interview. So they are a very valuable tool to get a snapshot of a candidate and decide who you want to bring forward to interview. They are still primary currency. So although, as I said, lots of other things in the recruitment process have changed or been amended slightly, a CV and a core interview are still the main components of most recruitment processes. Some places will do application forms. Some might ask you to record videos. There are variances, but most employers will still rely on a CV as that first piece of information that you need to share with them about yourself. Ultimately, it's a well presented selling document, so makes it sound a bit cold. But the marketeers and the business development people amongst you will be very used to putting together documents to sell the product that they're working on or the service that they're working on. So it's quite easy for those sorts of individuals to see this as a selling document. If that's not your natural inclination or what you do professionally, you need to try and get your head into that space when you're writing your CV. You need to think about who your audience are. You need to think about what it is that they're hoping to see, and give them as much of that as you can in this document. We'll go on to that a little bit later. So all of those are very much from the employer's side of things. From your side of things, it's also an incredibly useful document to give you a script to talk about your career. So when you go into an interview, the likelihood is you're going to be quite nervous. We all get very nervous. So it's quite useful to actually have that document in front of you that you can refer back to. They will have seen the same document, so it's consistent, it gives point of reference, it means that you've got information on there that you can literally point to and talk about. So it is a useful document for you too. CVs, we will talk about this a lot. You will hear the word tailoring and tailored and tailor a lot. So you'll have to forgive me in advance. CVs need to be tailored for the role that you're applying for. There is no getting away from the fact that each application needs a little bit of work. In this kind of one-click culture that we've got, it's very, very tempting just to go apply, and use the same document for all of your applications. We will go into why that is probably not your best tactic a little bit later. And it's an opportunity for you to highlight the experience that is relevant for the role that you're applying for. So through the tailoring and through the crafting of your CV, you can really make sure that an employer is seeing the relevant experience that you have for the specific role that they have available. So where do we start? I don't know about you, but when I'm faced with a blank sheet of paper, my mind goes equally as blank and I have very little idea where to start. You need to get yourself in the right mindset, first of all. This is not something that you can scribble on the back of a fag packet. That's a really old reference. This is something you need to give time and attention to. So make sure that you are in a good headspace. Make sure that you're feeling positive. Make sure that you have a comfortable place to sit. Make sure that you're not going to get disturbed. Make sure that if you're applying for a specific job and starting from a blank sheet of paper, you have that job description in front of you. You might have old copies of job descriptions of roles that you've had in the past, and they can be really useful to help with the bullet points of the types of tasks that you've done, the job titles that you've had. So get yourself in the right mindset, first of all. Consider your audience. Now, this is where a lot of people need to change the way that they write their CV. You really need to think about who it is who's going to be reading your CV. And that is quite difficult because it might be the hiring manager who might be an absolute expert in your particular discipline. However, it might be an HR junior. It might be an HRIS or an applicant tracking system. It might be an HR manager who's brilliant at HR and understanding a CV, but not necessarily an expert within your particular discipline. So you need to make sure that your CV is wide enough in terms of its language to reach a number of different potential readers, and have the same end goal of getting put on that yes pile. And we can go into that in a little bit more detail later. Be clear on your work goal. So make sure that your CV is not only tailored for the role that you're applying for, but is also tailored for what it is that you want to achieve. Now, obviously, Ten2Two being part-time and flexible specialists, we see a lot of people who might be deviating from the traditional career path a little bit. Maybe they're looking for a role that is at a slightly lower level than they've operated at before. Maybe they're looking for a slight change in discipline, or maybe they're looking for a role that gives them access to a different discipline completely. Make sure that your CV is very, very clear in what it is that you are trying to achieve. You can do this in your personal profile at the beginning of your CV. You can also do this by being clever about the way that you describe each of the roles that you've been in before. So a good example, if you are a senior manager, or if your most recent role has been within senior management, but actually you want a role that is a step back from that for whatever reason, make sure that you are explaining your personal circumstance within your pen profile at the top and being very, very clear about why it is that you don't necessarily want to follow that expected career trajectory, because that is going to be one of the first questions that you come up against. And if it's clear in black and white on your CV, you've already answered it before they have a chance to ask it. Create a basic outline. So a basic outline CV is what we would refer to as your master CV. Your master CV is probably going to be quite long, is probably going to have a lot of information, but it will give you something that you can then tailor, there's that word again, for each and every application without needing to start from scratch each time. So your basic outline is really your kind of master document. And you can go from there. You can add to it, you can detract from it, you can change it and manipulate it, but it gives you something that you can always work from. Some basics. You would be amazed how many people forget to put some of these basics on their CVs. And I laugh about it, but honestly, it's completely understandable. You get so lost in the content and everything else that you need to put in there and tailoring it and so on, that sometimes these things can just slip. So your contact details, first of all. You do not need to write your full entire address. What you do need is a reliable contact number. So whether that's a mobile or a landline or whatever it is, one that you are going to be near and answer. A correctly spelt email address, and if you have an up-to-date one, a link to your LinkedIn profile. If you do not have an up-to-date LinkedIn profile and don't intend to use LinkedIn, do not put a LinkedIn profile on there, because it's not going to help you if they want to check out your LinkedIn profile and it's completely out of date or empty. Similarly, if you're actively looking for a role and your LinkedIn profile is very well protected or hidden, then maybe don't put a link to it on your CV, because it's just going to take them nowhere. They're not going to be able to find you. Now, these things sound really basic, but they are, again, really important, and they can slip up, especially if you're adding to a CV over time. So if you're adding your most recent role in and then not going back and checking that it's in the same format as all of the other CV, the rest of the CV, or if you are tailoring that CV and you're putting new bullet points in or taking bullet points out, the formatting, font, and styling of your bullets need to be consistent throughout your CV. The look of your CV is incredibly important. If a messy CV with different fonts and different styling and the formatting all over the place lands in somebody's inbox or physically on somebody's desk, it's immediately off-putting. So you really need to make sure that it is a well-formatted and attractive looking document. The length, this is a question we get all of the time. It does not have to be 2 pages. 2 pages would be great. Lots of people have much longer careers than that. Some people have much shorter careers than that. There are some statistics around the amount of a CV that is read and the amount of time that is spent on different pages within a CV. So we would always, always, always encourage for the most key information, if possible, to be on your front page. After that, try not to make it too lengthy. Try and make sure that you're thinking about relevance rather than length. But don't obsess over it having to be 2 pages. You know, if you go slightly over, that's fine. If you're under, that's fine. It's really making sure that it is tailored and relevant for the role that you're applying for. There we go. Relevance. So sometimes it's previous roles that are your relevant experience. Sometimes it's education. Whatever it is that is relevant about you, make sure that that is on your CV. And as I said, if possible, bring it forefront onto that front page. Jane's taken herself off mute, which means she's going to ask me a question.
Oh, there was just a couple of things here I was going to mention, Jo. It can occasionally come up, we've seen it. And I know you mentioned on the contact details about obviously absolutely essential. Any contact details are correct, no typos in there. But sometimes, particularly with hybrid roles and office-based, if there isn't a relocation option there, at least having, if there's no other place in the application system to identify where you are located, then I would
Very
say
good
it's
point.
worthwhile
Very
at
good point.
least saying based in West London or wherever you happen to be based, if you cannot identify that by any other means, because some clients will say, I really do want someone within X radius, and there isn't an option to relocate on that. So I would mention that. There's just a quick
Absolutely valid
question,
point.
and just a quick question on, is there any preferred font or any recommended font on CVs?
So as long as it's legible, and I can never remember the names of fonts, I'm
Mm,
a big fan of Calibri, I
yeah,
think it's called.
yeah.
Um, Times Roman numeral
Times
is
Roman Calibri is
fantastic.
about 11, I would think, but it's, yeah, as you say, legible, I think is the most important thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't go for anything fancy and swirly. I
Yeah.
wouldn't go for anything kind of comic like. I'd try and keep it as simple and professional and legible as possible. And as for size, as Jane just said, around 11 in most fonts seems to be about right. But you can play with that between 10 and 12, I would have thought.
I would say it really depends because obviously I don't want to be differentiating between emails and CVs. So that might actually
Good point.
present itself differently. So I would just be very careful and make a judgment on that yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Photo or not. So this is also an interesting one. My background's in the music industry, and we used to get a lot of CVs with photos on, and we would immediately remove the photos. We do not necessarily advise putting a photo on. It's personal choice, but most of the time those photos will be removed for shortlisting purposes. So you do not need to put a photo on your CV. So here we go. Keep your CV as easy to read as possible. That way you'll maximize your chances of getting noticed. So easy, clean, simple. We see a lot of very beautiful CVs come through. Unless you're a graphic designer or the role that you're applying for has something to do with creativity and design, I think just keeping it as simple and clean as possible is the best advice. So getting into the meat of the content, the main components of your CV. So most CVs follow the same sort of pattern. They'll start with a profile. You might include some key skills. You'll then go into your career history. That is the bulk most of the time of your CV. Your education, and then other information. And we'll go through each of these in turn. So profile, sometimes referred to as a pen profile or an introduction. This is the hook, where the reader will then want to find out more about you. So this is a great place to put the kinds of words that describe the person you are or describe the competencies that you have. It's also a great place to talk about the reasons that you're applying for the role if you don't have an opportunity to have a cover letter. And as we talked about before, making sure that your work goals are outlined there. So if there is anything that is specific about why you're applying for that role, you might want to put a sentence in your pen profile. I try and keep it to a paragraph if possible. You may need to go over that. It doesn't necessarily matter. I'm just thinking about the space that you have on that front page. So your pen profile is an awesome place to be able to include relevant words that mirror the job advert. So words that might not come up in your career history, which are often, again, around your competencies. So if they're looking for somebody who's got great organization skills, or if they're looking for somebody who is positive and proactive, or if they're looking for somebody who has excellent communication skills, these are all the sorts of things that you can weave into the wording of your pen profile. And it's a real opportunity to sell. So this is where people find it really, really difficult. We're all very modest. We all like to talk about ourselves in very modest terms. This is really where you get to sell yourself. And one of the reasons that you need to be in the right headspace is that sometimes it can be quite difficult to do that. So you need to try and be in a really positive headspace when you write your CV so that you're really getting the most out of this first pen profile. Key skills. Some people have this in their CV, some people don't. And there's no rule that you have to have it. We feel that it's a really useful use of space on your front page. And it's an opportunity for you to really show off some of your key skills that might not necessarily come up when you're later on listing your tasks of your previous roles. And it's also a very clever way of being able to mirror that job description. So again, it's key in that tailoring. These key skills can be put in a nice little box. You can either have it outlined or you can get rid of the outlines. You know, they can add a bit of clever formatting on your CV. And it's a chance to briefly outline some of the key things about you that they may also be looking for. So specific software that they've asked for on the job description, or specific areas of experience that they've asked for on the job description, where those specific words might not then come up in your job history. So you might not have had the job title of administrator, but you've done a lot of administration. So administration is a key skill of yours. You might not have had the title of project manager, but actually within your role, you've done a lot of project management. So project management is one of your skills. As I mentioned a minute ago, it's a great place to put the specific names of softwares that you've used. So there's some examples there. The finance people among you may have used lots and lots of different finance systems. So making sure that if there's anything that they've made reference to on their CV, on their job description that you have used, making sure that that's noted as well. Career history. Now, this provides the main bulk of your CV. A great number of our candidates have got excellent careers behind them, and they should be really proud of them and really want to show them off. So some key things to think about is to start with your most recent employment, even if that is a career break. So we see a lot of CVs come through, and the job would be up to 2015, and then nothing. It's really, really important that your CV doesn't leave any question marks in the employer's mind. And there's nothing wrong with having a career break. You know, you've probably done some brilliant stuff with your career break. So make sure that there are no gaps in your career history, even if it's the most recent part of your career history, and that you're outlining what it is that you've been up to, because better to do that than leave a question mark. No more than 15 years and or relevant experience. So this is really difficult when you've got a really, really meaty career behind you to be able to bring it into that time frame. It is just a guideline. You can go back more than 15 years, especially if there's things in your previous career beyond that that were relevant for the role that you're applying for. But what is important is that we try and summarize as much as possible so that we are not necessarily going on for pages and pages and pages. Obviously, you might have been in the same job for 20 or 30 years, and then your 15 years is done in that job anyway. But I think the word relevant is really key then. So it's making sure that you are really highlighting the relevant experience whenever that was gained in your career. Focusing on achievements. So making sure that you are writing your CV in a way that brings to light the things that you achieved. So some people will have a job title, then some tasks, then their key achievements while they were in that role. Some people will intermingle those two things within their bullet points. However you decide to lay it out, make sure that you are able to point to specific things that you achieved within each role. And they don't all have to be massive, you know, they don't all have to be completely company changing, groundbreaking things. But if you are able to bring out examples of things that you have achieved that link to the job that you're applying for, all the better. Avoid industry speak and acronyms. Please do remember that it might not be an expert in your discipline or your industry that is reading that CV. And if they see a load of letters jumbled up that mean nothing to them, that's just going to confuse them. So do, again, think about your audience and think about who your audience could be rather than who you hope for it to be. And try and put some layman's terms in there rather than specific acronyms that not everybody would necessarily know. If it is something that you're going to need to repeat a number of times and it's quite wordy, then you can write it out the first time and then maybe put the acronyms in brackets later after it, so that later on you can use that acronym and they've got a point of reference. Use data. it's important to give scale and to outline the impact of your achievements. So I'm just thinking about in recruitment terms, if we were to go through a project of changing a system, that could mean anything, you know, just changing the system that we use. It doesn't necessarily give the employer an understanding of the scale of that project or the impact of that project or how that system change benefited the organization. So really making sure that you're using data to give some structure and give some wow factor, really, more than anything, to your achievements. And use action verbs. So rather than I was responsible for, make sure that you're saying that you achieved, or make sure that you're saying that you acted upon. I'm trying to think. My mind's gone completely blank, Jane. You're going to have to jump in with some action verbs.
Maybe delivered, I guess.
Delivered. There we go.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you know, if it wasn't all you, if it was a team, then there's no harm in alluding to the fact that it was a team effort, but make sure that you're then able to explain your part in that team and your part in a project. Otherwise, it can come across as though you're hiding behind other people's successes. So this is just an example for you. This is an example of a marketing manager. This marketing manager was with Company X for a couple of years. Company X, a brief introduction to who Company X are and what they did can be really, really useful, because again, your audience might not necessarily know who Company X are and what they did. And there could be something really relevant in who they are and what they did for the role that you're applying for, but don't assume that that's going to be known. So it's a really good idea to outline that. If you're able to put an idea of the turnover, that again gives the employer an idea of the size of business that you've worked for. That can sometimes be really important in their decision making. Reason for leaving isn't always necessary to write on your CV, but sometimes it just, again, takes away any question marks. So if you've been with a company for a short period of time and sadly you were made redundant, then popping that in there. Or if it was a contract, a lot of people don't necessarily outline when it's a fixed term contract or when it was a temporary opportunity. I think it's really important to put that on your CV, especially if you've had a number of them, because it just takes away any question mark around whether there was some job hopping at the time, if it's very clearly laid out that it was a contract. So with this particular marketing manager, designed and implemented. So again, it's those action verbs. And then later in that same bullet point, she's outlined exactly how that project impacted and the result that it had. Redesigned company website, again, action verb, and then a result of that project and what it achieved for the business. So this is a really great example, and Jane said these will be sent out to you, so please don't worry about scribbling them all down. A really great example of how you can word your bullet points to make sure they have the most impact. Education, training, and other. The majority of the time, this area should come below your career experience. The only time I would say that it should come above your career experience is if your education, training, and other is particularly relevant for the role that you're applying for, more so than your career experience. So if you've done a degree in marine biology and you're applying for a role within a company that specializes in marine biology, but you haven't worked in marine biology, you've worked in other sectors, then you might want to put your degree in marine biology front and center right on that front page. Otherwise, it should always come below your career experience. The majority of the time, we've covered the majority of our education before we've then gone into our careers. Sometimes you might have gone into education later on. It should still sit in your education sector. Again, the only time that's different is if it's interrupted your career at some point and you need to make sure there are no gaps. So you might make reference to it within your career history, keeping that continuity there. So start with your highest level of education. Include relevant training, so make sure that none of that training that you've done with previous employers or off of your own back goes to waste. Make sure you're noting it on your CV, especially if it's relevant for the role that you're applying for. Include letters after your name in your contact details if you have letters after your name following any particular qualifications that you've achieved. And then any additional information that might be interesting about the qualifications that you've secured. So if you've received a particularly great grade, if there's something relevant about the dissertation that you wrote, then maybe you want to make reference to that. If you have specialised in a particular area within your formal qualifications, you might want to make reference to that. All the time making sure that it's interesting and relevant for the role that you're applying for. And you want to double check, triple check, make sure at this point that everything is as correct as it possibly can be. We at Ten2Two are very, very forgiving of the occasional error here and there. Lots of CVs come through with date errors. It's very, very common. But not every employer is going to be forgiving. And as I said, sometimes a date error, they don't know it's an error and it leads to a question mark. And that question mark means that you get put on the maybe pile rather than the yes pile. I guess the one thing we didn't talk about there is the about me, so the hobbies and interests part of a CV. Some people love it, some people hate it. I think there's no harm in it. I think if you've got space to put a sentence about who you are and what you enjoy doing, it's very rarely going to be a negative. We've got anecdotal evidence that sometimes it can be a real positive as well. So I think it was windsurfing that was a hobby and interest of a candidate. And lo and behold, it was a hobby and interest of the person who was interviewing as well. And it was a brilliant icebreaker for them to have a conversation around something that they shared, to be able to get the flow of the discussion going. I'm not saying that you're going to be lucky enough to have that. And I'm not saying that you have hobbies and interests that are quite as out there as windsurfing. But whatever it is that you enjoy doing, maybe just put something in there that gives a flavour of who you are. And what it is that you do outside of work, because it could be an icebreaker. Best case. Worst case, it just gives a little bit more information about you. It could be that your hobby and interest is actually really related to the role that you're applying for, and then make a real song and dance about it. Bring it up there into your pen profile, and repeat it again in the hobbies and interests section. Maybe you've won awards for some of the extra crazy stuff that you do out of your working time. Have a sing about it, sing your own praises. Pitfalls to avoid. Never lie. It's sad, but it happens. And it only ever gets people in trouble. You have to remember that this document sticks with you, not just through the recruitment process, but beyond that. So you will be questioned on this document. You will be expected to know the document inside out. And if you have lied on it and you're nervous in your interview, the chances are you're probably going to fumble a little bit. So try not to lie. Talk about achievements you're confident about. So again, if it was a real group effort and you weren't really part of the team, but you just sat on the periphery of something that was achieved, then maybe don't shout about it that much unless you can really confidently talk about in detail that particular achievement. It might mean that you have to sit there and have a bit more of a think. It might mean that you really need to try and recall the details. That's fine, but just make sure that the achievements that you make reference to are ones that you're quite confident talking about, because they might be picked up on in the interview and you want to be able to talk about them eloquently and confidently. Beware of CV building packages. So there's a lot of things on offer online. We haven't talked about AI.
No.
We will in a minute.
We will. We'll try our best. We're at 36, just to let you
sorry,
know.
I'll keep talking. Sorry, quick.
There's a lot to cover, I know.
So just beware. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And a CV is meant to be you, so it does need to be you creating it rather than a stranger or a bot of some sort. As we said, avoid fancy fonts and formatting. Keep it nice and simple and clean. Long acronyms. So make sure that you're writing it out if you need to, put the brackets with the little acronym in if you need to. Unexplained gaps. We've talked about this. We have an entire separate webinar called Mind the Gap. So if you've had a and you're feeling uncomfortable about it, please Google our other webinar. It's on the website and it's also on YouTube. It's great for anyone who's feeling uncomfortable about any gaps on their CV. Oh, and anything that raises a question mark. So just be really questioning when you're reading your own CV through, and think who might be reading it and what might lead to a question mark in their mind, because hiring managers, HR people, they often don't have the time to go back and ask the question. It will often get you put on the question mark pile or even the no pile, and you need to be on that yes pile. So a good CV will be an easy read, be concise, comprehensive, descriptive, and personal. I'm going to quickly, very, very quickly talk about AI. AI is a brilliant, brilliant tool, and it is something that lots and lots of people get a lot of value from. Please do not rely on it to write your CV for you. The things that we think it can be really useful for are a starter. So if you're sitting in front of a blank page and you just don't know where to start, ChatGPT is your friend and it can help you. Once you've already got your document that you've written, not that ChatGPT has written, and you need it to be made more concise, you need it to be tidied up, you need a second pair of eyes, it can be really useful then as well. Most employers are getting really savvy to AI generated CVs, and a lot of them, especially those that use quite sophisticated applicant tracking systems, will know if your CV has been written by some sort of AI. So it's really worth using it as a tool, but not relying on it to do it for you. Sorry, Jane.
No, I agree. It's just being very, very careful around that, because you're right. And they will say, please do not use AI. We have tracking systems that will detect whether you are submitting an AI generated CV. So just to be mindful of that. Definitely as a tool, it's helpful, but not as an end product.
It might be able to help you with tailoring. You know, if you put in the job description and your CV, it might be able to make some suggestions around how you can tailor your CV to make it better. And that's the two on this slide, is be relevant for the role. So make sure you're reflecting sectors, professions, and show transferability if it is something that you're moving into. Leave no question marks. So make sure everything's chronological, there's clear rationale, and that your career journey is kind of understandable. And then number 4, the ultimate aim is to get you on that yes pile. So to get you in for an interview, and that's when you can start to sell yourself. We have a separate webinar on interview skills. Do feel free to go and Google that or join when we're next presenting. I don't know if we've got time left for questions. I'm so sorry.
Interesting, it's okay, because actually some of the things you touched on, Jo, were some of the questions that have come up over the course of the session, in terms of fonts on CV, how to lay out CV gaps. We will cover some of that in the Q&A when we send the information out, because there's a lot in some of the questions for us to try and put down now. So much better that we do that in detail after, than try and very quickly cover it off now. So rest assured, everyone, that we will be taking your questions into account when we send out the information after. But sadly, for the moment, I think we don't have time to cover any more. So much content in that.
Sorry, I waffled way too much. I am sorry.
No, you know, but we will cover it. And if you've got any questions, do come back to us. But what I will say is, I'm afraid that is all that we do have time for just now. Thanks so much, Jo, because that was a great presentation. You did cover a lot in that time that we had. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. We do hope that you found our 10-2 webinar useful. If after today's webinar and the follow-up that we'll send, you feel that you still need some further help, do get in touch. You've got our contact details there, and you can also find some more information on our additional paid career support services that are on our website, which are proving very popular too. As I mentioned, we will follow up with a CV template that came up in the questions, a summary on the questions that we've had, and a link to the webinar, so you can watch that again at your leisure. And we know that candidates have found this very useful. So please just allow a day or so for that to come through. We always love to have your feedback, so please do get in touch if you have time. Leave us a Facebook, Google review. These are always very much appreciated. But that's it for now. We do hope to see you on another 10 to 2 webinar soon. Joe's touched on a few. Please do look those up. But for now, it's a bye from me
And a
and a
bye
bye
from
from Joe. Bye, everyone.
Have a lovely evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining.
Bye. 1 minute.